Welcome to today's episode for people interested in the extraordinary, yet ancient and often long forgotten stuff. This is your host, Joseph Schinwald from homebythebeach.com. Our guest today is Sunil Raheja. Hello, Sunil.
Hi, Joseph. It's great to be here with you.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you on the episode. The topic today is the book Dancing with Wisdom, a sacred quest to restore meaning, purpose, and fun to your life and work. Quickly introducing Sunil. Sunil Raheja is a psychiatrist, leadership and management coach, and author of the book Dancing with Wisdom. And it is his privilege to work with senior leaders who feel stuck, empowering them to re-engage with deeper purpose and live life in crescendo, so their best days are still to come. Sunil has worked as a psychiatrist for over 25 years. He lives in London, England, with his wife Sally. They have 4 grown children. Sunil is also a founding circle member of the John Maxwell Team, with experience in teaching and training in the areas of leadership and management. So let's talk about your book, Sunil. What made you write this book, and who is this book for?
Great question, Joseph. So what made me write the book? I think it was really, I didn't start off with the question of wisdom, but when I thought about my life, I knew I had a book inside me, and I'd have had wanted to get something out, but I wasn't clear what it was. And that was about 10 years ago. And the more I actually started blogging and podcasting. And what I noticed as I did the blogging and the podcasting is that I kept realizing how often in my life I felt stuck and unsure of what to do or how to fit in. I mean, I came as an immigrant child from India to the UK, and was in a very English environment at school. And I was always the child who was slightly awkward and didn't fit in. And I realized that actually sense of not fitting in, not really understanding how to make decisions and how to, it's something that has sort of dogged me and been with me all my life. So I ended up going into medicine, which I, with not feeling I didn't fit in there, becoming a psychiatrist, finding some degree of affinity with that. But then entering a field of learning disabilities, mental retardation, which again, if you like, is very much on the fringes of psychiatry as well. So I really I'm trying to make sense of life. Initially, my podcast was called Making Sense of Life. And so some of the first topics I discussed, both on the blog and the podcast, was the subject of wisdom. And I began to realize, actually, it's not just me who has these struggles, but actually a lot of us in some way or other are struggling to make sense of life. That's in a nutshell is how I came to write the book. And just to emphasize, it was really a subject that found me. It was like a jigsaw puzzle, if you think. When you think of different pieces, they gradually began to come together around this topic of wisdom. And this is this area of really, when we're born, there is no sort of instruction book in a sense of how do I live, how do I make decisions, what do I do? And I'm hoping that with my own personal experiences, my reflections as a psychiatrist, as well as looking at the world around us, we're just more and more aware that we're surrounded by information and technology, and we're in uncharted territory, not sure quite, because in a sense, in the past, the future was a little bit of extension of the past, but we're living in a completely new world. It's so different to anything previous generations have known or experienced. So that's in a sense why I wrote the book. And the book is aimed at people. I mean, I work with senior leaders who are ambitious, who are often high achievers, but they're at risk of burnout, and they also find themselves frustrated because the outward success they thought would bring them the fulfillment they want doesn't do that. And so I help them to, as it were, connect with the deeper meaning and purpose in their life, so that they can, as you said earlier on, they can live with their lives with crescendo, with their best years ahead of them. That's I hope that's helpful there.
Yes, absolutely. In your book, you have several parts, and so there's a lot about talk about wisdom, and there is this wisdom of the heart, the wisdom for the mind, and the wisdom for life in your book, the three subcategories. How would you distinguish between wisdom and knowledge, and then wisdom concerning the heart, the mind, and life?
Yeah, great question, Joseph. I think the first thing, in a sense, wisdom, I sort of think of wisdom like a diamond. It's got so many different facets to it, and it's such a rich concept. We've moved from the agricultural age, the industrial age, into the information age, and we have lots and lots of information. But what I think we are transitioning into is the age of insight, or the age of wisdom, because we have so much, any subject you look at, there's just so much information about it. But how do I decide what is important and what is irrelevant? So we come to wisdom because we realize that we're at the end of our own resources, and we need some outside insight or help to work out what we should do or decisions that we should make. So I've got a number of different definitions of wisdom, but one of which is timeless truths that connect you to the best version of who you are and who you long to be. And if you think about, if science is organized knowledge, then wisdom is an organized life in the true sense of the word. In the sense, my life is I'm not just a human doing, I'm a human being. I understand myself as body, mind, and spirit. And I'm able to understand where I fit in life at this day and age and in this time. And as you say, the book it's in three parts: wisdom, desiring wisdom, developing wisdom, and deepening wisdom. And I start off with a question about the need to discover wisdom. The need that we think that I need more money, I need a different relationship, I need to move somewhere. And those could all be maybe very good and valid things. But I really want to say and present the case is actually what you need above anything else in your life is wisdom, because wisdom will help you not just get the things that you're hungering for, or something even better than what you're hungering for, but also enable you to enjoy what you have, as well as have the appropriate level of ambition for the other desires you have. And so under desiring wisdom, I say, we have, it's wisdom for the heart, because we have restless hearts, we have longings and desires. And so there's the emotional need and the emotional longings we have. Wisdom for the mind, the intellectual need, the questioning that we have, and the questioning minds that we have. And then wisdom for life. And I talk about how we live in a world that, because of a lack of wisdom, more and more psychological problems, loneliness, stress, burnout, depression, anxiety, rising suicide rates, growing mental health problems among, between all groups, but we're particularly seeing it among teenagers and young people, because we simply lack wisdom.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. And, I was also asking myself before the podcast interview, how would I think the difference between wisdom and knowledge? And for me, we are, as you said, in the information age, we are very much objectifying knowledge out there. It's always objectified, but we don't really make the reference point of that knowledge, which is really the same word. If you, like wisdom, if you refer to who you are, if you refer to your being, whether it's whatever cosmology you believe in. If you believe in Hinduism, Buddhism, or Christianity, Judeo-Christian, Islamic tradition, it's always really about like who you are when you talk about wisdom. And you defined this very well: the wisdom for the heart, the mind, and for life. And that is, I think, the problem often in our age, that we are so used, even from schooling already at an early age, that we are always like trained to get objectified knowledge. It's an object of our consciousness, but it's not referring to our consciousness. It's not explaining the deeper wisdom, who we are, and that includes also the meaning of life, of course.
Yes, I think that's what's so fascinating about wisdom. It's not just about solving complex problems that we don't feel we have the resources for. It actually takes us, as you say, to the heart of the universe. Why am I here? What am I called to do? How do I live my life? How do I relate to others? Ultimately, how do I leave this earth? So that's what, in a sense, makes it a fascinating and endless subject. Actually, you triggered a thought to me. Humorously, somebody said, in terms of this distinction between wisdom and knowledge. Knowledge is knowing that tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is knowing that you don't put it in a fruit salad. So, so that's an interesting way to think about it that way. So we can go from the very sort of funny side to that, to right to the deep questions of life, as to why am I here, and what am I doing with my life.
So the first part is desiring wisdom, and the second part now is developing wisdom. And there you talk about managing our ego, removing our idols, and challenging our assumptions. So where does the ego come in here in the quest for more wisdom? Does it get in our way?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think when we talk about ego and we say somebody's got an ego, we're usually not giving them a compliment. But the fact is that all of us have an ego, and the question is having the right balance, not too much. And obviously that we see that in arrogance, we see that in people who are very self-centered and very much promoting their own views and opinions, and walking, as it were, over other people's feelings and walking over them. But also there's a problem having too little ego as well, and almost like a false modesty, putting yourself down too much. That's also not healthy. And so this issue of managing my ego, having a healthy self-respect, not thinking too much of oneself and not thinking too little of oneself either, that's going to be really, I would say, is a vital wisdom skill. And in the book, I talk about getting that balance right, but also recognizing when is it that maybe my ego is crossing the line. And that might be in things whereby I start comparing myself with others. I need to show, I need to show others how brilliant I am, or how better than I am than they are. When people sort of criticize me or disagree with me, that if I start becoming very defensive, all these kind of things are hallmarks of my ego, as it were, getting out of control. And so if I can begin to recognize that, if I can have self-awareness to see that I am, as I said, as I'm crossing a line, and that my ego is crossing a boundary that it shouldn't, then I think that will also actually help me to grow in wisdom. There's an ancient proverb that says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And in a sense, that's very much about engaging with reality and engaging with the world, not as I would wish it to be, but as it actually is. And so it's having the humility to be able to see that. And I think a properly balanced ego is one that has humility. So again, I think C.S. Lewis has a quote. He says, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. And so it's that important distinction there.
Really, I like this author also. Yeah, and I read your book, and it's very obvious that you have studied very in depth the Christian tradition. Even though I have my master's in divinity and I studied it also a long time ago, but I really specialized in Oriental wisdom tradition, and not so much wisdom literature, because there's the wisdom literature which really concerns the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, which is the Bible, and then there's the wisdom tradition, which is the Buddhism, Hinduism, and Taoism, and so forth. And I believe that the ego, it's where you say it gets out of balance. Sometimes I also think that the healthy ego is absolutely necessary. I'm not in favor of like some spiritual teachers speak, like how you have to completely destruct and eliminate the ego. I think it's more about recognizing that the ego is like a map. So when I go hiking in the mountains in Mallorca, where I live, I will look a little bit first, and if I don't know the area, I will look on the internet and I look at the trail and I see the map. But that's my ego, so to speak, right? That's a representation of who I am when we talk about the ego. But it's not the real journey. The real journey has no map. The real journey is you're walking out there and you see this beautiful blooming flowers and the oranges, and then you have a nice view on the ocean, and you're going with friends, you have beautiful conversations, you're coming back, you have had a workout, you feel great. That was a moment in your life, and even though you looked at the map before and you were aware where you're walking in all this, so you don't get lost and you get the right trail. Nevertheless, that what you looked before on the internet was a representation of the actual trip. So the ego is kind of a map. It's not the territory, but it's a healthy thing to have it. All of the things we think of and all these beautiful images we have about the human is a good thing. We can think, we can rationalize, but we should not confuse it with the actual being who we are.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I think a key point you're making is the importance of engaging with reality. And I think the danger is that I have an idea, and that's a chapter in sense of challenging one's assumptions. I have an idea about how the universe should work, the way things should be. If you like using your analogy, on the map it says that things should be going like this. But if I look in front of me and there is, if there's a mountain that I see in front of me and the map doesn't record the mountain, then I don't say the map is wrong. I say, well, the mountain is there. And I don't say the map is right. I say, well, there's a mountain there, so the map is wrong in that case. I have to engage. I have to engage with life as it is, not as I would wish it would be.
Yes, that is so true, because, as we know, we have nowadays in our time so many mental models about reality. And we know, as you said earlier, wisdom is like, what did you say? I think you compared it to some kind of a crystal or some
jewelry, like a diamond,
like a diamond,
like facets of a diamond,
facets of a diamond, beautiful.
Yeah.
So I think we always have to be aware that we can always only reach a certain understanding through those mental models we are offered to, like modern science, could be Buddhist worldview, could be the Genesis, where God created the world, or it could be the Taoist version, where everything is organic, and there's the Tao. They all believe really there is something higher than us, but they don't name it so much God anymore. But it's there. It's not personal sometimes, but it's there. Like in Hinduism, we have the Godhead. It's like a supra-personal entity. It's much bigger than we are. And then they have the gods, they're like mythological. You have the Vishnu, the Brahma, it goes on, hundreds sometimes, right? And then the Bhakti yoga, where you can choose your own personal God. In the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, we have the God of the Old Testament, and then we have Jesus. And it's not very different, but it's according to one's liking, I would say, right? According to how you feel close.
Well, that's interesting you say that, because I suppose what I've come to the conclusion is that wisdom is, we have an understanding of wisdom in the Old Testament, and we see that in the books of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. And it's interesting that it's a bit like the sun rising. You have darkness, and the dawn gradually comes, and then gradually it gets brighter and brighter. So if I had to go through those books, you take Proverbs is presented as a bright young teacher who says, if you want to live a wise life, a successful life, then do these things. Be honest, work hard, be kind to your neighbor. I'm just obviously paraphrasing a lot of them there, but it's what we would sort of say are good deeds. And this wisdom is personified as a bright young teacher, and she's saying, do these things and your life will go well. That's all very well and good, but then Ecclesiastes is presented as this sort of middle-aged cynic who says, hold on, Lady Wisdom, this bright young teacher says, work hard, be honest, treat others with kindness. But I don't see the world like that. I see people who are lazy. I see people who are dishonest. I see people who are cruel. I see them survive. I see them thriving. How does this make sense? And so he goes on this long journey trying to make sense of the world, looking for wisdom. He says under the sun. And I think Bible commentators interpret that as meaning without reference to an infinite reference point. And he looks in education, he looks in employment, he looks in enrichment, he looks in enjoying himself. The 4 E's: education, employment, enrichment, and education. He looks in those areas, and he can't make any sense of it. And then that his famous line, "It's meaningless. It's all vanity. It just doesn't make sense. It's like smoke." Okay. But then at the end of it, he sort of goes full circle and comes back and says, I think it's in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, he says, the conclusion of the matter is fear God and keep his commandments, because one day God will bring to light everything in a person's life. whether what is hidden or what is revealed, and nothing can, as it were, escape his knowing. So live with that awareness that your whole life will one day be on display. And so there's that sense, so although he's very cynical, he has to, in a sense, submit that you try and find meaning outside of an infinite reference point, and you won't find it. And then we come to the book of Job that says there is a degree of mystery as well, because it's a famous Old Testament story, but Job is a man who appears to be very wealthy, appears to have everything going for him. And then, as it were, he has a happy family, he has lots of wealth, he has lots to enjoy in life. And then you have this conversation, sort of the dialogue shifts between God and Satan. And God says to Satan, look at my servant Job. No one worships me like he does. And Satan's right. The only reason why worships you, loves you the way he does is because everything goes well in his life. And so he then basically, God says, okay, you can put him to the test. And then we have several chapters where Job goes through his terrible suffering, which doesn't make any sense to him. And the comforters come and they say, you're not living a good life, maybe you're being punished. And he's quite clear in his own mind that, no, I've done what I can. I don't understand this, but I will still trust God, and I will still submit to him, and I will still worship him. And it's only, I think, in the 40th chapter that God appears to Job, and God doesn't actually give him the reply that you might expect. He doesn't say, well, this was a test between Satan and me, and I wanted to show him how great your faith is. No, what God does, he shows Job this mythical, he shows this creature called Leviathan, and he shows him Behemoth, another creature, and says, look at how amazing these creatures are. And that they're so, they could kill you with their strength. But I want you to know that they're good, and I made them, and I want you to live in awe and wonder. So the response to that is live in awe and wonder. And that's as I said at the beginning, it's understanding of wisdom. It's like the dawn rising. And when we go into the New Testament, we find actually that wisdom is personified in the person of Jesus, and that he becomes our wisdom. So going back to your earlier point, is wisdom is a person who we can know as well, and we can bring into our lives.
Yes, and in Greece, in ancient Greece, it's Sophia. It's she, wisdom, yes. Sophia, philosophy, yeah. Philosophy, like philosophy. The love of wisdom, love of wisdom.
Yeah, and it's fascinating actually, just to mention, because you asked it. This subject of wisdom has followed me all my life, and my eldest daughter got married a couple of years ago, and I had to give the bride talk. And when I did it, I realized after, I think she was 26, actually, no, 24 when she got married. And I realized that we'd actually named her Sonia, which is from the Greek, as you said, Sophia, for wisdom. And in Punjabi, it means beautiful one. So we'd actually named her Beautiful Wisdom.
Beautiful.
so it's amazing how subjects follows you like that. It's quite amazing, really. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, where do you turn when you are at the end of your own resources and there seems no human source to help? So in our Western culture, we turn, either we are atheists, or we turn to God, right? And in the ancient world, the mystics also speak about the dark night of the soul, and it becomes mystical, the whole thing. You get the wisdom, the enlightenment comes not from figurative imaginations, as Carl Jung says, but it comes from where we all come from. It's the void, the darkness. That's where it really comes. And I have experienced it. You have experienced it for sure. It's not when you're doing well and everything is fine. But it's like when you're really, really at the end of the rope.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it becomes it becomes like a desperate need. Yeah, I mean, in a sense, in the book, I refer to the death of a good friend of mine, Abhishek Banti, and the circumstances around his death. When I was in India in the last week of his life, and I spoke to him on the morning of his death, knowing that he was going to go later on that day. And it just raised up huge questions in my own mind in terms of what am I living for? How do I live in light of the fact of my own mortality? And what do I view as the ultimate big questions of life? So that was a very, very huge influence in terms of not just writing the book, but in terms of my own quest for wisdom as well.
Yes, that makes sense. So then when you are looking at the further sub-chapter of developing wisdom, which is part 2, removing our idols. What do you mean by that? How does it help you in developing wisdom if you remove your idols? What I learned in the book is that idols can also get in your way.
Absolutely. And when I'm referring to idols, I'm actually referring not just in a sense to statues that we see, but actually things that we make too important. So my family, my money, my career, things, you know, we say that life has to go a certain way. I need this thing to be happy. If I don't have this thing, and you fill in the blank, then my life is at a loss. And every one of us, in a sense, does that in one form or another. I think it was Martin Luther who said that the human heart is an idol factory. In terms of the fact is that we're always putting something that we feel we need for our well-being, for our security, for our health, and for our satisfaction and for our fulfillment. And the problem is that unless it's nothing in this life ultimately will fulfill, and nothing in this life ultimately lasts. So it really does point to the fact that we are, I think there's a famous quote that we're not just human beings with a spiritual existence, but we're also spiritual beings with a human existence. And so there are deep longings within my heart that nothing can fulfill, but there's a tendency for me to look for things of this earth and in this life to fulfill. And I'm always going to be dissatisfied. I'm always going to be frustrated or disappointed at some point or other, because I'm putting too much emotional investment in them. In the New Testament, there's a word, a Greek word called epithumia, which means over-desire, longing for something too much. And so when I have this over-desire, I'm too much weight, too much expectation on something that ultimately cannot fulfill. So if I put that onto my wife or my children or my job, ultimately all these things are going to be taken away from me. And ultimately they're going to disappoint in some way or other. And when that happens, it's then easy for me to become angry or frustrated, or to want to take, to be just be angry and frustrated, and even go into despair. And that's in a sense when I can begin to unmask what are the idols that are really controlling me. It's not what I see. When things are going well and everything, it's easy to feel that I'm safe and secure, but it's when something is threatened I feel I really need to have to be happy. That is again a warning sign. So I think, wisdom is recognizing that and seeing that that's a tendency of what I do. So it's unmasking and, as it were, dethroning those idols.
Yeah, because now it's about life again. It's not just knowledge. Yeah. And it's interesting because when you study, you can see parallels. Like in Buddhism, there's the Four Noble Truths. And the second noble truth of Buddha was Trishna. And that is thirst. It's like you're continuously thirsty. You cannot stop the thirst if you're always chasing idols, if you're always becoming attached with, I want more of that. And you cannot become satisfied with that, because ultimately you should be like the Hindus say now, the ultimate thing, they say Satchitananda is your own consciousness, your own existence, and the bliss. And actually in those traditions, you cannot actually achieve more than you are already, even though you might be like a seed of a tree. Let's compare as a metaphor. And the seed grows into a tree, but everything is already in the seed. And so absolutely. You can't really achieve anything beyond yourself because you are already and there in those traditions, right? And then there's just a matter of having these fascinating experiences in life where you can grow additionally. So you don't achieve anything, but you are what you are, and also that, because it's not like a static thing, right? It's like they have it's like an internal weaving. I like the Judeo-Christian tradition a lot, and I'm reminded now when I talk with you about the book of Job, Ecclesiastes, all these other books which are about wisdom, Solomon, and all this. It's beautiful, but also, of course, there's this huge distinction between in the cosmology, because really that it comes down to the cosmology where you either believe in a creator God or you don't. And of course, in India, it's more like a divine play, Leela. And then there is Maya, the delusion, the illusion, the real good illusion also, the real illusion, which makes us the magic of life. But it's for them, it's just an illusion, like a simulation. Whereas only in Taoism, of course, when they talk about creation, it's not like in the Judeo-Christian tradition where you say, well, nice, God created man and women, so to speak, out of clay, metaphorically speaking now, of course, but there they talk like philosophically about it. They say, well, what is the purpose of a pot of clay? What is the thing in a pot of clay? Not the thing, but what we can learn from it. Why is it useful? Why is it useful? It's useful because of its emptiness.
Yes.
Yeah? And that's where we come to Shunyata in India and all this void talk in Buddhism. And I would say, you know, when you go into this dark night of the soul, or when you find out where many people reach out to God, maybe the first time, like in a genuine way, because many things are already taught to us when we are young, then it's that choice we have. We can meditate, or we can receive, you know, whatever you can ask things from our personal God. It's really a choice we have, right? Now, then there is this challenging our assumptions in that second part, developing wisdom. What do you mean? Which assumptions?
Yeah, I think we all have assumptions about life. And I think one of the things that's very sobering about wisdom is that you can intellectually on one level know something, but not actually be able to fulfill it in your own life. So, you know, I call about it, the greatest gap in the universe is the knowing doing gap. So if I know something, then I'm automatically living and doing it. I make that assumption. One of the things that's very sobering as well is the character of King Solomon. I mean, Solomon was described as the wisest man who ever lived. You know, he produced all these proverbs. He was admired for his insight. You know, there's a famous story about two prostitutes who came to him, and they said that they both had babies, and they were sleeping next to each other. And one said that in the night, one of the women had turned over and crushed one of the babies, and each woman was claiming that the alive child was theirs. And what Solomon does in his wisdom is he says, okay, well, let's just cut the child in half. And the woman whose child it really was said, no, just don't do that. Give her to the other one, don't let her die. Whereas the other woman who was lying said, yeah, just kill her. And that gave Solomon wisdom to understand what to do. So again, I use that as a story and as an example of just amazing wisdom to deal with a complex situation. But what is sobering about Solomon is that with all that wisdom, when you look at his life, it's actually a deep disappointment, because he disobeys what to do in quite fundamental ways, in quite specific ways. He's told that he mustn't amass great amounts of gold, which he does. He's told he mustn't get too many wives for himself, and he has, I think it's 600 wives and 400 concubines. He mustn't import horses from Egypt, which he does. So he deliberately disobeys, and the verdict on his life is that he did evil in the sight of God. So you know, I find that very challenging, because even though I've written a book on wisdom, and I'm fascinated by the subject, I'm just aware that I have assumptions within me that do not measure up to the reality, and I have to be very careful about my own ego, about my own idols, that I do not allow my assumptions to get in the way of my own quest for wisdom as well, even as I teach others, even as I have written a book and explore this subject, which I'm so fascinated by.
Yes, so true. You know, when I looked in the mirror, I always saw like a very fit person. And then recently we went really on a long walk, and I got like a little awakening call. I have to do more exercise. So there was a wrong assumption. Yeah. There was a wrong assumption there.
Wrong assumption. That's right. Yes.
So the next thing in the part 3, and the last part is deepening in wisdom. Yes. And then you write about defining wisdom with the divine. 4 vital questions and the wisdom quest and the next best steps. So we should talk a little bit about how do you deepen your wisdom.
Yes. So you said at the beginning is that wisdom is much more than getting answers to the complex problems that we have in our life. It actually brings us onto an inner quest of who I am and what I'm living for. And it brings us, as we've been alluding to here, the whole issue of deep questions of life. And we've mentioned about particular books of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. I talked about how in the New Testament, Jesus is wisdom personified. And it's interesting that in the New Testament, it says that the wisdom of God, foolishness to the world. And in many ways, what wisdom is saying is that things that appear weak and vulnerable and fragile are ultimately has his iron hand on them. You know, he has his hand on the widow, the fatherless, the orphan, those who are persecuted, those who are struggling. He sees them, and so the things that this world values are worthless in the sight of God and in His wisdom. So it does call us to define wisdom with the divine, and I think it's especially relevant in our age that is getting more and more secular as well, and that makes the assumption that this life is all there is. And as we alluded to, you know, earlier on, you know, the writer to Ecclesiastes says, he was a sort of middle-aged cynic. He sort of says, well, it's all meaningless. It makes no sense. And I think in our secular age, we're needing wisdom more and more. So this is, I talk about the importance of just defining wisdom with the divine, with this, I'd like to call, you know, infinite intelligence as another name for God, the one who is the creator of all things and the one who's ultimately in charge of all of history, who knows my life completely, who understands, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly of my life, and is working his own purpose. It's important for me to live life in partnership with him. You know, that's why in a sense it's called dancing with wisdom, because when you have to be very aware of your dance partner, you know, as they make moves, you make moves to create something beautiful. Whereas in life, you know, things go wrong, we have frustrations, we have problems. And, you know, I say we live in a world that's cynical, confusing, complex, and chaotic. And it was like that before COVID. It's even more so now. And that's leading to rising rates of mental illness, frustration, discontentment. Whereas when I learned to dance with wisdom, then I learned to say, okay, maybe life's not going the way I want it to go. Maybe there are things happening in reality that I wish shouldn't. But how can I engage with this in such a way that I can make something beautiful for God, so that the good can come out of it? You know, we talk about it in terms of like a redemptive perspective on our suffering, looking for the good that can come out of the bad. And ultimately, you know, as I was alluding to, is wisdom does that with this view that's so different from this world. So I think the point I'm sort of just getting at from there is this, you know, the stories that come to mind is in the Old Testament. There's a story of Joseph and how Joseph is betrayed by his brothers, becomes gets sent as a slave to Egypt, works for a man called Potiphar, gets unjustly accused of trying to rape Potiphar's wife, gets under in prison, is forgotten, but through a whole series of adventures ends up becoming prime minister. So when he faces his brothers at the end of when their father has died and the family had been rescued from a famine, he can see that although what his brothers did was terrible and evil, God used that for a greater purpose. And so he's able to say to his brothers, what you intended for evil, God intended for good, so that many lives would be saved. And then the other side of that as well is the fact that the ultimate thing is seen in the wisdom of the cross. What appears to be foolishness, a man dying on a cross, is actually the means by which Jesus brings his salvation to the world. What appears weak and foolish, you know, the cross was such a thing that in Roman culture at that time, you wouldn't even use the word cross in polite circumstances. It'd be like using a 4-letter swear word. And yet that is the center of biblical Christian faith, which appears completely ludicrous and foolish to the people of this world. So that's this whole issue about defining wisdom with the divine, and gives us a radical understanding of what wisdom. We move on to the 4 vital questions, which are related to being, relating, doing, and leaving. Who am I called to be? And that's a huge question in our society and age in terms of identity. I talk about, my own journey, coming as an immigrant child from India to the UK. Growing up, I was told that because I was in a very English environment, I was told that India was your home. And when I would go to India, I only went when I was about 8 years old, and realizing, being told by my family there that actually, no, you're very English, and not being able to fit in. But it's not just me. I think we live in a day and age where more and more people are questioning who they are. And it goes to most fundamental questions about, whether or not they are male or female. It goes to as basic as that. And so we're seeing rising questions of identity, but I think wisdom gives you that answer. Who am I called to be? Relating, how do I relate to others, particularly in the global village that we're a part of, and the opportunity that I have to relate to so many people. But again, we can only relate to a relatively small number we have meaningful relationships with. And then doing, what am I called to do that no one else can do? And again, the order is very important, because being precedes doing, and being precedes being and relating. So I'm a human being, I'm not a human doing. So it's being, relating, doing, and then ultimately leaving. How do I leave this, and what kind of legacy am I going to leave? But not just that, also transitions. How do I leave one job? How do I leave a relationship? How do I leave one place to another? How do I close chapters in my life? So those are those 4 vital questions. And then I talk about your wisdom quest, which is that all, in a sense, I've tried to be as transparent and open about my own life, my own struggles, and say, okay, to you, the reader, or the listener, because the book's on audiobook as well. What is it about? How about your own life? What are the unanswered questions in your own life? What are the things that you're wrestling with and grappling with, trying to make sense of? And how can you create a space within which to explore that with the person of wisdom as well? And that's very much an introduction to my own coaching program that I do with senior executives. And then finally, your next best step, because with all that's out there, all we have is the present moment. So how do I live in this present moment with all its confusion, complexity, and chaos at times, and make the most of today and what I've been given? And then I close with a tribute to my friend Abhishek Banerjee, and about his life and the impact that he had on me.
Yes.
So I hope that gives you a sort of summary, as it were.
Yes, we went quite through the book.
Yes.
Of course, I downloaded also the workbook, and that's fantastic, which is part of your program.
That's right. You can get that at drsunil.com/workbook. Actually, that's just available.
It's for those who read the book, basically.
It's for those who read the book, but if you haven't read the book, even you can sort of glean. It's supposed to accompany the book as well, but it gives you a sort of little summary with some reflective questions. But I think definitely the two go together. But if you want to get a flavour of what we've been talking about, you can certainly get it from the workbook at drsunil.com.
I will put it in the show notes as well. You are very, you did a great job with offering additional value for those who read the book, because you have the podcast, you have the workbook, and you have a blog, and that's fantastic. And then you have the program, right? What is the program called?
Well, it's a coaching program called the Dancing with Wisdom coaching program. So those are the resources that we have currently at the moment. Yes.
Yeah, that's really nice. It's so well professionally put together. I really like the way it is so really nicely focused and aesthetically really beautifully done. Now, for me, when I can make a little comment on your last explanations, for me, when I say defining wisdom with the divine, even though I studied it 5 years, and I'm definitely not an atheist, but I was already those 5 years in upstate New York, where I got my divinity degree. I was already very much interested and drawn to everything Oriental, because I was born here, right? In Austria, and we grow up with the Catholic tradition, which is a beautiful tradition, and I love the Bible. However, I got very interested in, defining the divine in not as a personal being. It can be defined as a personal being, or it can be experienced for many people as a revelation. And for me, I had a few spiritual experiences as well, and I felt very much drawn to the Upanishads, for instance, in Hinduism, because I had a spiritual experience. It was about 20 years when I read it, and it was mainly, it was talking about God, but there is actually, yes, this other definition of God, which is more supra-personal. It's not personal because they say we are, and you know more about it because you know about India, of course, but it's like we are the personalities of this divine play, right? And so it expresses itself through us, through our personalities, which is also temporal. Ultimately, as they say, we return to ourself, to the Atman, Brahman. Whether this duality stays or whether it merges, there are different opinions about it. I believe that there are just many, many words. And when we talk like this, it's always good to define it. So you defined it, and I would define it a little bit differently, and others would define it differently. There are, as I said earlier, people that speak about energy, they speak about the void, they speak about the Tao, they just have different names for it. And ultimately, we all talk about that which is more than us. Obviously, there is much more than us, even though we are like a fractal, a fractal entity of it. We probably, like Rumi said, that Persian poet, we are not a drop in the ocean, but we are the ocean in a drop. So we all have it all in us. And the Bible says we are created in the image of God. We always can make the bridges. So I just wanted to leave this little comment. So now I think it's important to remind our audience one more time how they can get in touch with you. And then I would say we wrap it up. So personal, I think it's the website you have has everything in it. You can find the book, you can find the podcast, you can find the blog, and you can find the program. And it's drsunil.com. DR probably stands for doctor, right? DR, Sunil, your first name, Sunil, and then just .com.
S for sugar, U for uncle, N for November, I for India, L for Lima.com. Yeah.
Yes. And that's drsunil.com. And that's where also everybody can go who just listened to this episode now and they have nothing to write down. You can actually remember it. So, Sunil, that was a wonderful conversation. I thank you so much for having been on the show. It was a real pleasure and learning experience. So thank you very much, Sunil.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And thank you for the opportunity and privilege to join you on this podcast. Thank you.
Wonderful, yeah. And I thank my dear listeners for joining us today. The recap of the show with all the show notes and the links mentioned during the interview, basically that website, and I will add now also where you can download the workbook. Even though you didn't read the book yet, you can have a look at the program and at the podcast, listen to some episodes, because Sunil, of course, is also a podcast host. And then that is all there. And you can see it on ombythebeach.com, which is my website, as you know, and also on the different podcast platforms. And I will also put it on YouTube. So if you like this podcast, please subscribe to have you here again for our next episode. This is your host, Joseph Schinwald. Thank you and goodbye until we meet again.